42 years of savings, gone in a single morning. A father left staring at a screen that read 0. His daughter had taken everything and vanished with a criminal. But what she didn't know was that her own son, just 15, was already 3 moves ahead. Asterisk. If you're enjoying this story, hit follow and tap like, then I'll reveal what happened next. Asterisk. I had done this thousands of times before. Card in, 4 digits, withdrawal. Routine so simple it barely touched thought. But that morning, the machine flickered, hummed, and threw words I had never seen aimed at me. Insufficient funds. I stared at the screen, convinced I had miskeyed. I pulled the card out, checked for scratches, slid it back in. Same PIN, same request. Again, insufficient funds. My hand hovered on the keypad, suddenly heavier than it had any right to be. I heard someone shift behind me in line, her keys clinking like impatience given sound. I couldn't move. I tried the savings card next. The same for digits. A sequence I could type in my sleep. My chest tightened as the screen answered with the same refusal. Insufficient funds. Last week, that account had held $12,847. 42 years of careful overtime shifts at the Ford plant. Lunches skipped, pennies stretched, every quiet decision stacked like bricks to build the future. Now the numbers were gone, wiped out like chalk under a wet rag. I forced myself to gather my cards. Muttered an apology to the woman waiting. The machine spit out a receipt, and I read it because I had to, even though I didn't want to. Balance, $0.00. Transaction, 9:23 a.m., my daughter's name attached. Inside the branch, the carpet cleaner smell felt too sharp. Janet was behind the counter, the same teller who had greeted me for years. She smiled out of habit until her eyes flicked. To the screen in front of her, "Mr. Williamson," she said. "Quieter now. The withdrawal was processed this morning. Entire balance, by Vera Hayes." She turned her monitor so I could see it myself. Vera, my daughter, the girl I had carried on my shoulders through county fairs, the teenager I'd driven to debate tournaments, the woman who once whispered that she didn't know what she'd do without me, her name beside the theft of my life. The air tilted. I steadied myself against the counter. "She wouldn't," I said, though the evidence glared back at me in black and white. "She had authorization," Janet replied gently. "Joint holder. Choice I'd made 3 years ago sat there on the screen, mocking me. I had added her when she was drowning in her divorce, when she needed stability, when I told myself it was only precaution. Now that act of trust had bled me dry. I thanked Janet, though the words scraped on the way out, and walked back into the brightness outside. My truck sat where I'd parked it, loyal, waiting, unchanged. But I wasn't unchanged. Something fundamental had shifted. The drive home was slow, too slow. I passed the same diner, the same hardware store, but they didn't look the same. My reflection in the rear view looked older than it had that morning. I pulled into the driveway and sat with the engine running. I could have called her. I almost did. My thumb hovered over her name in my phone, waiting for explanation that would make sense of betrayal. But I didn't press. The silence was brutal, but it gave me room to admit something I had been burying for years. I had trained her to believe my love came without boundaries. Every time she fell short, I caught her. Every time she asked, I gave. Divorce fees, rent payments, school supplies for Mikey, each one justified, each one wrapped in love. But somewhere in the rhythm of yes after yes, she had learned that taking was safe, and that my giving had no edge. I got out of the truck finally, walked into the house, and placed my wallet on the kitchen counter. I opened the fridge and counted. A carton of eggs, half a loaf of bread, milk just over the expiration line. In the gas tank, maybe 3 days of errands left. In my chest, a weight I didn't recognize. No one was home to witness me sit at the table. Micah was at school. Vera was God knows where, with him, the man she called Titus. The man whose smile had always seemed to measure the room rather than share it. I didn't rage. That surprised me most. I didn't throw the chair or slam my fist into the wall. Instead, I felt myself go still, like water freezing under a shift of wind. The anger was there, yes, but it settled under the surface, heavy and cold. The quiet pressed in. It was heavier than shock, heavier than grief, but in that quiet, I found a sliver of clarity I had avoided for too long. She had not become this overnight, and I had not stopped her. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and admitted it. Without excuse, I had been complicit in my own undoing. The fridge hummed. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Life went on around me, indifferent to the collapse of mine. I told myself I wouldn't call her. Not yet. I needed space between the theft and the confrontation. I needed to take inventory first. What was left? What could be built again? What couldn't? I wrote it down on the back of an old envelope. $40 cash in my wallet. Truck still running? House still mine. Gas enough for 3 days? Food enough for 2. One grandson, 15 years old, counting on me. That was the list. That was what remained. When I looked at it, the paper seemed both pitiful and defiant. Everything reduced to a handful of lines, and yet, everything I had left was still mine. I folded the envelope, placed it in my shirt pocket, and sat there as the weight of 42 years pressed hard against the thin fabric. And for the first time in my life, I understood the difference between being emptied and being finished. The house looked the same when I walked back through it, but it didn't feel the same. Every corner seemed to carry a quiet accusation, every object a reminder of how we'd gotten here. I had thought of this place as safe. Now, each room whispered evidence of a long history I had refused to examine. I started with the living room, not because it mattered most, but because it was closest. The mantel was lined with photographs, each one a frozen moment that had once meant pride. Vera in her blue graduation gown, smiling like the world was hers. Vera on her wedding day, standing next to Paul before everything fell apart. Micah blowing out candles on a cake I had baked myself, the year his mother had forgotten to order one. These were supposed to be proof of a life I had built with care, but as I looked at them now, they felt like receipts of a pattern I hadn't noticed in time I moved into the kitchen. The drawer near the stove stuck the way it always did. I pulled it open, and inside were papers I'd shoved there over the years. Receipts, bills, notes from school. I flipped through them like an accountant auditing his own failure. Here was the lawyer's invoice from her divorce, with my handwriting on the bottom corner. Paid Dad. Here was a repair bill for her car, back when she'd insisted she needed something reliable after Paul left. I had covered that too, telling myself she needed a fresh start. Each paper carried my signature, not in ink but in sacrifice. I went upstairs, passing Micah's backpack hanging from the banister, the chess set still spread out on the table in his room. He played the game with patience, with foresight. It struck me that I had never once demanded his mother play life with the same discipline. With her, it had always been reaction, rescue, repeat, recover. She made a mess, and I swept it up. Over and over. The bedroom was harder. The dresser still held cards she'd made for me when she was little. World's best dad, written in bright marker, uneven letters. I remembered the pride in her eyes as she handed them over, believing it was true. Back then, it had been true. Somewhere along the way, though, my love had become a tool she used, not a truth we shared. I opened the bottom drawer and found a folded newspaper clipping, her valedictorian speech. She had said my name that night, said I taught her that hard work could overcome anything. The gym had filled with applause. I had believed her then. Now, those words read like irony carved into newsprint. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the clipping, and let the memories come. They weren't all bad. In fact, most were good. That was the problem. I had built a story around the good ones, and used it to justify the rest. The bike I'd bought when she was 7, the time I stayed up all night fixing her science fair project, the weekends at the park with bread for the ducks. These had become the myth I clung to. The evidence that if I just gave more, she'd remember who she was. But evidence works both ways. The unpaid debts, the broken promises, the whispered excuses, they were evidence too. And looking back, the record was clear. Love had made me blind, but love was also what forced me now to see. I stood and walked into her old room. She hadn't lived here in years, but traces remained. The wallpaper she'd picked as a teenager, faded posters curling at the corners. A desk drawer still filled with old notebooks. I opened one at random. Inside, half-finished sketches, lists of things. She wanted ideas that never went anywhere. I traced the lines of her handwriting with my thumb. I wondered if she had ever seen me as more than the man who would always fill the gaps. Back in the hallway, I paused. The house wasn't condemning me, it was presenting the truth. The history was written in objects, papers, and quiet corners. My generosity hadn't been generosity at all, it had been fear. Fear of losing her, fear of being the kind of father who said no, and fear had a cost. 42 years of work, gone in a single morning. I walked back downstairs and stood in the kitchen, the heart of the house. The counter held a jar where I kept loose change. I tipped it out, counted quarters and dimes until I had $9 and some coins. It felt symbolic, like even here, even in the smallest things, I was tallying what was left. Micah's chair sat pulled out at the table, his schoolwork scattered across it. I ran my hand over the papers. He was careful, precise, already more disciplined than his mother had ever been. For a moment, I let the weight lift. I hadn't failed completely. One life in this house had learned a different lesson, but the inventory wasn't finished. I opened the pantry, checked the shelves. Cans of beans, rice in a bag, flour in a tin. Enough for a week, maybe more if rationed. I took stock as though writing a ledger. What had been taken? What remained? What could not be stolen? By evening, the sun was low, streaking the kitchen in orange light. I sat at the table with the envelope in my pocket, the one with the numbers I had scribbled earlier. Cash truck, house, food, grandson. I added one more line, history, because that's what I had been cataloging all day. A history of choices that had led here. I didn't cry, I didn't shout. I simply wrote the word, underlined it once, and folded the envelope shut. The inventory wasn't just about what was gone. It was about admitting the truth of how it disappeared. When I turned off the light and walked toward the living room, the house felt both emptier and clearer. I could see the shape of the past, and in that shape, I could already sense the faint outline of what needed to change. I expected to be the one to explain everything to Micah. I had rehearsed it in my head. How to tell a 15-year-old that his mother had emptied my accounts, that the life we built together had been shattered by her choices. But when he walked into the living room that evening, I realized he already knew more than I did. He carried himself differently, with a steadiness that felt too heavy for his age. He sat down without me asking, placed a manila folder on the coffee table, and said quietly, "Grandpa, I need to show you something." His tone wasn't afraid. It wasn't even hesitant. It was the kind of tone you use when you've already decided what needs to be done. He opened the folder and spread its contents like pieces of a puzzle he'd already solved. A printed mugshot, grainy but clear, a map with an address circled in red ink, handwritten notes in careful script, dated and referenced. At first I thought it was some school project, something for history class. But then I saw the name on the mugshot, Titus Morrison. My chest tightened. "Micah, where did you get this?" He looked at me with the same calm I'd seen on his face at chess tournaments, when he knew the board was already in his favor. I heard them talking Monday night. Mom and Titus. I was getting water, and the door was cracked open. They said they were taking everything and leaving before anyone could stop them. I sat back, stunned. Monday night? 2 days before the withdrawal, while I had been sleeping, my daughter had been plotting to take the last of what I had left. My voice felt unsteady when I asked, "Why didn't you tell me then?" "Because I knew what you'd do," he said. "You'd try to talk her out of it. You'd give her more money just to keep her here. And she'd take it, and then she'd still leave. I couldn't let that happen again." His words hit me harder than the ATM screen ever had. I had thought I was protecting him all these years, but in that moment, it was clear he had been protecting me too. Micah pointed to the mugshot. I looked him up. "He's wanted for armed robbery. There's even a reward. I called the police tip line this morning before school. Gave them the address, the car, everything." I stared at him. My grandson, 15 years old, sitting there, with evidence laid out like a detective. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just explained it like it was necessary. "I wanted you to have one more normal day before everything changed," he said quietly. I didn't know whether to feel proud or heartbroken. No boy his age should have had to carry that kind of weight, but he had carried it anyway, with more clarity than I had managed in years. I leaned forward, my hands trembling against the table. "You did this by yourself?" He nodded. "I learned from you, Grandpa. You always say when someone threatens your family, you protect them. That's all I was doing." The simplicity of his words broke something in me. For years, I had convinced myself that enabling Vera was love, that covering her mistakes was protection. But this boy, my boy, showed me what real protection looked like. It wasn't indulgence. It was action. Even when it was hard. Micah shuffled his notes back into the folder, each page stacked neatly, methodically. Then he looked up at me and said, "I know you're hurting. I know you wanted to believe Mom would change, but she won't. Not with him." His honesty cut through me, but it was the kind of cut that lets infection drain. Painful, necessary, cleansing. I saw in him the truth I hadn't been brave enough to admit. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "You shouldn't have had to do this." "I wanted to," he replied. His voice was steady, but his eyes softened. "You've spent 15 years taking care of me. It was my turn." The room was silent after that. The kind of silence that isn't empty but full of grief, of pride, of recognition. I realized then that the roles had shifted. I wasn't just his guardian anymore. He had become mine, in a way I hadn't expected. I thought back to every chess game we'd ever played. Micah always saw the board 3 moves ahead. He'd sit, patient, waiting for me to notice the trap he'd already set. Tonight, it was no different. Only the board wasn't wood, and Ponset was our lives. And my grandson had already secured the win. I leaned back, letting the weight of that truth settle. He wasn't just a boy anymore. He was becoming the kind of man I had always hoped he'd be. Clear-eyed, steady, unwilling to compromise when it mattered. For the first time since the ATM, I felt something like hope. Not because the money would come back. Kit might not, but because I wasn't facing this alone. I had a partner sitting across from me, one who carried both my blood and a strength I hadn't known was there. I looked at him, at the folder, at the careful notes in his handwriting, and I thought, maybe the future hadn't been stolen after all. Maybe it had just shifted hands. When he gathered the papers and closed the folder, he did it with the quiet, the finality of someone who knew the next move was already underway. He slid it across the table toward me. "We'll get through this, Grandpa," he said, "but you have to stop letting her hurt you." I nodded, the words catching in my throat. He was right. And somehow, hearing it from him made it possible to believe. The phone rang later that night. I knew who it was before I picked it up. Only 2 people in the world could make my chest tighten like that. One was asleep upstairs. The other had already taken everything from me. I let it ring once more, then answered. Her voice filled the line, sharp and brimming with practiced outrage. "Dad, I know why you're calling." I stayed silent, waiting. "You had no right," she snapped. "That money was mine too. I deserved it after everything I've been through." Her words came fast, like she'd been rehearsing them. For years I would have rushed to soothe, to remind her she wasn't alone, to offer something, money, reassurance, anything to keep her close. Tonight, I let the silence stretch. "Say something," she demanded. Finally, I did. You took everything. Vera, you don't understand. Titus and we had plans. We needed a fresh start. You've always had enough. I've always had nothing. I closed my eyes, letting her words wash over me. They were the same arguments I had heard in different shapes for years. Rent she couldn't pay. Bills she couldn't cover. Dreams she couldn't fund. Always a reason, always my wallet at the end of it. But Micah's folder still sat on the table beside me, the mugshot staring up with its hard truth. My grandson's steady handwriting had anchored me to a different reality. And for once, I wasn't going to step back into the cycle. You left your son, I said quietly. There was silence on the other end. For a moment, I thought she had hung up. Then I heard her breathing fast, shallow. He's fine. He'll adjust. Kids do. No, I replied. My voice surprised me. Calm, but firm in a way I'd never managed with her before. He needed you, and you chose to leave. She scoffed, but it sounded weaker than before. I chose myself for once. Is that such a crime? I thought about the years, her swollen face at my door after Paul's violence, her tears over lost jobs, the endless times I had picked up the pieces. I thought about the girl who once whispered that she loved me best of anyone, and I thought about the cold voice at the ATM monitor this morning, telling me there was nothing left. It's not a crime to choose yourself, I said slowly, but it's a betrayal to destroy the people who love you in the process. Her tone sharpened again, defensive. You're making me into the villain. You always do. You think you're some saint, but you've smothered me my whole life. You never let me stand on my own. I could have argued. I could have listed the times I tried to teach her, the times I begged her to take responsibility. Instead, I let her words sit. Maybe there was truth in them. Maybe my endless rescues had kept her weak. But excuses didn't change the reality. She had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. I'm not arguing with you, I said finally. I'm telling you, this ends tonight. Her laugh was bitter. Ends. What does that even mean? It means no more money. No more bailouts. No more pretending everything will be fine if I just give you one more chance. I love you, Vera. I always will. But I won't let you hurt me or Mikagan. There it was. The word I had never given her. The word I had been afraid to use. No. It came out steady, unshaken. And for the first time, I felt the weight lift as it left my mouth. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged. Like both of us knew something irreversible had been spoken. You'll regret this, she whispered finally. When I'm gone for good, when you never see me again, you'll regret pushing me away. My throat tightened. But I didn't waver. That's your choice. But if you want to come back someday, it will have to be different. You'll have to be different. Her breathing filled the line, ragged now. Then the click of disconnection. The call was over. I sat with the phone still in my hand, staring at the empty space where her voice had been. For years, I had imagined that setting boundaries would feel like losing her. Tonight, it felt like reclaiming myself. Upstairs, I heard Micah move. The floorboards creaked as he came halfway down the steps. Grandpa, I turned, surprised. You're awake? He nodded, his face half in shadow. I heard some of it. I didn't know what to say. I had always shielded him. From her words, her chaos, her demands. Tonight, he had heard the truth. Did I do the right thing? I asked before I could stop myself. The question sounded small, unsteady, like it had slipped past all my pride. Micah walked down the last few steps, stood beside me, and said simply, yes, one word, steady as stone, and somehow, that was enough. I hung up the phone and set it back on the table. The room felt different now, larger, cleaner, almost lighter, not because anything had been fixed, but because the weight of pretending had been lifted. But for the first time in years, I had said no, out loud, and though it left me trembling, it also left me standing taller. I looked at Micah, his young face, calm, older than it should be. I thought of the folder, the map, the careful notes. I thought of the boy who had acted when I could not. Together, we sat in the silence that followed. It wasn't comfortable, not yet, but it was honest. And honesty was a start. I didn't sleep much after the call, but I woke lighter. Not happy, not healed, just lighter, like a strap had been cut from my chest. Micah came to the kitchen in his hoodie, eyes steady. I poured coffee and said what needed saying. We can manage. He nodded. Let's write it down. That became the rule. Before action, a list. We cleared a space on the table and opened an old ledger, the kind with lines and no excuses. We made columns: food, fuel, utilities, school, savings. Under savings I wrote one word: emerge. To say, the box under my bed had already proven why the word mattered. We counted what we had. I laid the cash on the table in quiet stacks, like we were building with wood instead of paper. Micah read the numbers as I wrote. No speeches, no shame. Just arithmetic. Cash only, I said. He tapped the page. And receipts? The first errand was the grocery store. We went together. I pushed the cart, and he kept the list. We put back what didn't fit the total, returned a bottle we didn't need, chose rice because it stretched farther. At the register, he weighed apples and did the math in his head. Back home, we labeled envelopes. Fuel, food, Micah's, school, house. One small one we called Future, and we fed it a $10 bill to prove we still believed in time. Afternoons found their rhythm. Micah mowed lawns and swept porches. I fixed a leaky faucet and a fence post. We didn't advertise. When we were paid, we counted the bills, then split them into envelopes. No credit, I said. No tabs. He repeated it like a pledge. I called the bank and set alerts, froze cards, closed the joint account, changed PINs. The clerk asked if I wanted to file a complaint. I said I wanted to protect what was left. The rest could wait its turn. Nights were honest. Homework at the table. Dinner on real plates, dishes washed without talking about who should have done them years ago. I learned the price of a week of electricity and how sleep returns. When the doorbell no longer means debt, sometimes Micah would ask, "Are we okay? We're okay?" I'd answer, "Not a promise I couldn't keep." A status report. A letter. Came from the police about Titus. He'd been picked up near Columbus, the same day Micah made the call. I read it once and set it down. "Do you feel better?" Micah asked. "I feel accurate," I said. We didn't celebrate, we made dinner. He chopped onions while I browned meat. We ate and talked about a geometry quiz and the sound the truck made on tight turns. Justice didn't change the price of fuel. It didn't return time, but it steadied something inside the house. On Fridays, we played chess after dishes. I used to let him win. Now I tried and still lost. He didn't gloat. He reset the board and showed me the move I missed. "Here," he'd say, "this square is the whole story." I kept working small problems. I called the insurance company and cut a premium. I lowered the thermostat. I sold a drill I had two of and bought a wrench. We needed more. None of it heroic. All of it mine. There were setbacks. The truck battery failed and took half an envelope. My back seized one morning, and Micah did the lifting while pretending not to notice me moving slower. I thanked him and meant it. He answered, "We're a team." On Sundays, I wrote the week's numbers in the ledger. Some lines looked thin, others grew. The column that mattered most wasn't money. It was a sentence I wrote every time. We did what we said. 2 weeks in, the house sounded different. Fewer sirens from my phone. No footsteps at midnight trying to dodge the cost of a new mistake. Silence, for once, meant peace. A call from Vera came once. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Later, I listened. "Dad, I need help," she said softer than before. There was a pause like a hand out in the dark. I didn't call back that night. The boundary wasn't anger anymore. It was policy. When I answered the next day, I kept my voice even. "I can't send money," I said. "If you want to talk about a plan work, counseling, restitution, we can talk." She was quiet. "So that's it. That's a beginning," I said. After I hung up, Micah handed me the future envelope. "Put 5 in," he said. "For sticking to the plan." We did. And for the first time since the ATM went blank, I felt not just lighter, but steady again. 2 months passed before she came back. By then, the house had found a new rhythm. Lists on the table, envelopes tucked in the drawer, homework on weekdays, chess on Fridays. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Quiet, steady, honest. The knock came one afternoon, sharp enough to cut through the calm. I opened the curtain just enough to see. Vera stood on the porch, thinner than before, a small duffel bag at her feet. Her hair was tied back roughly, her jacket worn. She didn't look like someone returning home. She looked like someone stranded. "Dad," her voice carried through the door. "I know you're in there. Please open up." Behind me, I felt Meek's presence before I saw him. He stepped closer, silent, waiting. His eyes asked the question he didn't say out loud. "What now?" I kept my hand on the deadbolt. 2 months ago, I would have opened the door without hesitation, let her step back into the house, into my savings, into my weakness. But something had shifted. Boundaries had grown where only fear used to live. I turned the lock and opened the door halfway. Vera's face softened with relief, as if the crack alone was invitation. She took a small step forward. I didn't move aside. "Hi, Dad," she said, then glancing past me. "Hi, Micah." Micah didn't answer. He stood where he was, his posture steady, his silence saying more than words could. I looked at her and spoke evenly. "What do you need, Vera?" Her eyes filled quickly. "A place to stay just for a while. I've got nothing left. Please." The words landed heavy, but I kept my voice calm. "This house has rules now. Stability, work, accountability. If you can accept that, then we can talk." Her face tightened. "Rules. After everything I've been through, you're setting conditions." "Yes," I said, for the first time. Silence stretched between us. She glanced at Micah again, maybe looking for softness, maybe hoping for the old pattern to return, but he didn't move. His loyalty was quiet but clear. I thought of all the years I had blurred lines in the name of love. Every bailout, every yes, every excuse I had handed her like lifelines that turned into ropes binding us both. I couldn't do it again, not for her, not for me, and not for the boy who needed this house to remain steady. "Can I at least come inside?" she asked, her voice smaller now. I met her eyes. "You can come in if you're ready to live by what we live by. If not, the door stays half open." She didn't answer right away. Her hand flexed at her side. torn between pride and desperation. Micah shifted closer to me, not hiding behind, not stepping in front, just close enough to let me feel his presence. A quiet reminder. We were no longer alone in this choice. The air between us was heavy with everything unsaid. Regret, anger, fear, love. All of it crowded the threshold, waiting for me to weaken. But I didn't. Finally, she shook her head. I can't live like that. I nodded once. Then I can't let you in. Her eyes filled again, but she didn't argue. She picked up the duffel bag, turned, and walked down the steps. I watched until she reached the sidewalk, then closed the door. The latch clicked. Not like an ending, but like a boundary drawn clean. I turned and met Micah's gaze. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just nodded, a small motion that carried the weight of approval. We went back to the table. The envelopes were still there, the chessboard waiting. Life hadn't paused for her arrival, and it wouldn't pause now, for the first time. I understood what love with limits looked like. Wasn't rejection, it was a door half open, waiting for a choice only she could make.